What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes checking in here. Going to talk to Dan Hardy, who's one of the most interesting fellas in the sport of mixed martial arts. He's fought. He's a matchmaker now. He commentates. The guy can do it all. We're going to be talking about the PFL finals coming up here on Black Friday, November 29th. So eat your turkey, get that early Christmas shopping done in the morning, and then settle in and watch some fighters. 12 fighters compete for $1 million each. Dan, am I wrong? The ladies might steal the show. Dakota Ditcheva and Taila Santos is the one I'm most excited about. I'm excited about all of them, but this one's just a notch above for me. How about you?
Yeah, I agree. And everyone I'm talking to is giving me the same kind of vibes, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people are excited to see Brendan try and get the belt a second time around, especially after he missed out last year. And obviously, Timur Hizriev undefeated in front of him as well. It's a real stiff test. But I feel like there's just been so many questions around Dakota. It's like, is she the real thing? There are a lot of fans that are they're like 1 foot on the hype train. They're like, I'm not quite ready to fully commit yet. I need to see her fight someone who I know is an elite level world-class fighter. And that's Taila Santos, isn't it? Like she holds that credential. That pedigree of competition when she steps in there, and that's what Dakota's got to prove herself against in order to keep moving forward with her career and keep growing her brand. A big win over Taila Santos would go a long way, probably further than all of the rest of her fights put together, if we're honest. And I'm certainly waiting with bated breath to see how that fight plays out, because I fully respect Santos's well-rounded mixed martial arts game, and I could see a lot of ways that she could cause Dakota problems.
And so what I wanted to ask you was, in gambling, they talk about the over-under. Where do you think the fight's going to end? Do you want to bet it over 2 rounds out of 5 or under or whatever? What I want to ask you is, from the analyst side, we all feel like Dakota comes out sprinting, right? That's her strength. She's waxed everybody pretty early. She's pretty devastating. And Taila, obviously, we've seen her go all the way to 25 minutes, very competitive against another great fighter in Valentina Shevchenko. For you, where's that tipping point where you feel like Dakota's strength starts to wane? Although she may prove us wrong and goes a strong 25, I don't know. But where do you feel like is that point where things start to possibly shift in the favor of the more experienced fighter?
I think really I don't expect Dakota to slow down cardio-wise. I don't really feel that she's going to get tired, right? I feel like even if she's forced to wrestle for 15 minutes, she's still going to start the 4th round ready to throw with heat. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if she loses a little bit of snap, it's not going to be a great deal. We're not going to see a difference. She might be able to feel it, but from a fan's perspective, sitting on the outside of the cage, she's still going to look really sharp going into those championship rounds, just purely based on the athlete that she is and the way that she trains and who's preparing her. They train world champions at ATT, and she's getting that same treatment as everybody else has got that's become a world champion. So I don't expect her to fade physically. One thing I will say, though, is if she is down on the scorecards, like say, for example, if Santos is able to come out and force her to wrestle for the first 10 minutes, and then she's got to win the next 3 rounds at least if she doesn't get a stoppage, that's going to put pressure on her that will make it easier for Santos to find a way into that body lock, right? Like, if I'm Taila Santos, I'm thinking to myself, right, well, I can strike if I need to. My MMA striking game's pretty good, but compared to Dakota, I'm probably going to be, a step or 2 behind, both reach and speed as well as technical ability. But then if I get into the clinch and I'm Santos, I'm like, right, well, this body lock works well. She's got a long body. She's quite. Sorry, I lost you for a second. She's got a long body. She's quite narrow in her frame, so getting that body lock on her will be much easier to manipulate her and move her around than some of the other fighters that Santos has fought, especially the likes of Liz Carmouche, who's a strong wrestler and incredibly strong in the clinch. And then once Santos is able to get this fight to the floor, if she is, and she might not be able to get it the first couple of times, she might fail a couple of times, but that's where her game starts to come into play, right? She gets the fight to the floor. She forces Dakota to scramble to get back to her feet and exposes her back. And time after time, we've seen Taila Santos jump onto people's back, not with a proper rear naked choke position, and just start crushing across their lower jaw. Like if you're in that position, you're tired and you're struggling to breathe, like who knows what's going to happen. Like panic moves, mistakes can make, and you can give up an opportunity. And I think that's really where Santos's game needs to be. It needs to be forcing Dakota and squeezing her and, making her work in close range positions where she can't utilize those long range strikes.
One more question about the ladies, and then we'll move on to the undefeated Russian against the leg kicking machine out of Manchester. We don't want to piss those guys off either. All right. Whoever wins this fight, are they possibly the best flyweight in the world? And perhaps I'm even talking more about Ditcheva, since Santos, to be fair, does have a loss to the current UFC's their champion, their flyweight champion, Valentina Shevchenko. But is there an argument? Because I find this as exciting as Hanan Fajeda and Francis Ngannou a few weeks ago, and John Jones and Stipe Miocic. I was more excited about the PFL heavyweight matchup than the one that just took place. I'm really pumped about this one, but could Ditcheva have a claim? Should she come out ahead on the 29th?
I mean, I certainly think so. And the fact that Santos has been the distance with Shevchenko is going to make it easier for the fans to see the difference in in Dakota's skills compared to Shevchenko. Like, look, Shevchenko is a very, very experienced and dominant fighter. She's got a really, really great, well-rounded skill set, which is probably part of the reason why Taila Santos had a very competitive fight against her, because she's also very well-rounded. Mm-hmm. Like, and what we've learned about mixed martial arts is that if you've got someone who's a specialist, it's going to take someone that's well-rounded to beat them. If you've got someone who's well-rounded, generally it's a specialist that's going to beat them, right? So if Dakota's got enough skills in her game to stuff takedowns or to get back to her feet or to defend any submissions that she finds herself in this fight coming up, if she proves that she's got enough grappling for people to go, you know what, I think that would work against Shevchenko as well, then I don't really think there's much of a question around Dakota's striking compared to Shevchenko. Like, Valentina's good, but she's a point fighter, right? I found this when I was doing Inside the Octagon and trying to break her down, because like you don't get highlights from her fights. Like it's single shot, bit of footwork, single shot, and there's not like a dialogue between her and her opponent. She outpoints them until an opportunity presents itself. Dakota's not like that. She's a killer, right? She walks people down and beats them up and tries to put them away. And I feel like she can do that partly because she's got the skills, but also because she is doing it to people. Like she sees people fall at her feet on a regular basis. I think when the fans can see that happening as well, they can much easily picture Dakota being able to win a striking exchange with Valentina. The question I think around everybody is, well, can Dakota keep the fight on the feet? Can she stay out of the clinch? And I think she can prove that against Taila Santos if she's successful.
Dan, do you feel like this is make or break for her? Because she is still relatively young, and we've seen fighters take an early loss and be able to kind of come back from it. This situation, the magnitude of it, all the hype that's been put behind her, do you feel like it's a make or break moment for her?
I certainly think it may feel like that for her. But like you said, she's what, 13 fights into her career. She's still young. Even if she had double the fights, she'd still have time to achieve something great in the sport. I just think because expectations are so high, that's why she's going to feel like she would fall from a great height if she's not successful. But if you write this down on paper as Dakota versus Santos and one record versus the other, and you take all of the hype and all of the promotion and the media talking about this and talking Dakota up, like, this is not really a fight necessarily that Dakota should win, right? This is a real big step forward in competition. But at the same time, I feel like that's where the PFL format potentially opens these opportunities up, where Brendan Loughnane, who's in the main event, wasn't able to win last year because Jesus Pineda came out from nowhere and starched him. Do you know what I mean? And it's like every now and then you'll get one of these fighters that will get an opportunity, like Paul Hughes is another good example against AJ McKee, where they make the most of it. And I think that's the situation here, right? Where Dakota, everyone feels like Dakota's expected to win, but in actuality, this is a great opportunity for her to step forward in her career. She might not quite be ready, but because the expectation is that she is ready, that's gonna be putting an additional amount of pressure on her shoulders, I would think.
We've talked a lot about the main event, and I want to pick your brain on it. Whose plan B do you feel would be more effective? Because we kind of have an idea of what their plan A's are going to be, right?
I would say that. Okay, well, look, if Brendan's forced to wrestle with Hizriev, that I don't think that works out very well for him. If he's forced to strike with Hizriev, I think that works out pretty well for him, right? But if Hizriev's forced to strike with Brendan, I don't necessarily think that's such a bad thing for him either, right? Like, Hizriev is very effective at long range. He's got a great kicking game, but he also, with the threat of his takedowns, it opens up opportunities. I watched a couple of his fights back today, and he's very good at dipping and throwing that rear uppercut. Very good at making people think that he's going to wrestle when he's not. And sometimes just the fear of someone level changing underneath your punches is enough to shut your game down. I feel like that. We talk about the A game of both the fighters. I think it's far clearer for Brendan that he has to stick to the A game. Whereas if Hizriev tries 3 or 4 or 5 takedowns and it doesn't quite work out, I still feel like he's going to be competitive on the feet. So I don't feel like there's as much pressure on Hizriev to force the fight into his direction. I just think, based on preference and ease of a victory, wrestling is going to be, the obvious way forward for him. And Brendan's got to really, really do a lot of damage to that lead leg to slow down Hizriev no matter what he decides to do.
Do you anticipate a lot of mini battles throughout the night? And what I mean by that is early on, the wrestler taking the striker's best shot, now what? Or the striker fighting off the takedown early on. Those mini battles that we talk about in between rounds, you anticipate a lot of those this night, and do you feel like they'll tell us a lot?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think we've got a few different fights where that's potentially going to happen. We've got, obviously, we've talked about Dakota. I feel like Santos might have to be encouraged by her team to keep pushing forward with the right game plan, even though it might not necessarily be working out for her every time. I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for the Santos career if Dakota does prove that she can defend some takedowns and scramble. I also would expect Oleg Popov to struggle with the jab of Goltsov early as well. It wouldn't surprise me if Goltsov's able to stuff a few of his takedowns and force him to box for a little while. And, that's not ideal for Popov. I expect that to be a conversation in the corner as well. Just encouraging him that if he keeps pushing with the takedown, that eventually he's probably going to get it. Again, another interesting problem that might have to, a fight that's going to potentially shift back and forward as it plays out. And then, the welterweights, like we've got 2 guys there that are great wrestlers, but really prefer to strike. I feel like with Umalatov and Musayev, one of those 2 guys is going to be forced to wrestle. And that's going to be an interesting decision that they're forced into based on how it comes about, because that would mean they've already lost the striking exchange in some capacity. Unless one of them is going to surprise us and come out and wrestle early. But I feel like both of them would look at their opponent and go, you know what? Wrestling seems like a waste of energy against this guy. I'm going to stick with my striking skills and keep that in the back pocket.
I'm a huge Musayev fan. I was eventually going to get to him. I loved watching him in his last fight because it seemed like what he wanted to do was keep his hands a little lower, make sure the fight didn't hit the ground, use his striking, and then when it was time to wrestle, he would wrestle. But what I saw there was some mind games in him breaking his opponent. I think a lot of fighters could actually learn from his style of fighting. In fact, a long time ago, they used to say, if things are even, a takedown at the end in the last 30 seconds will win the fight. But now, of course, MMA rules have changed, and damage is at the forefront. Attempting to finish, when you're on the ground, is at the forefront. But I still saw something in, if it's pretty even after 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the way he closes every round is still a tactic that can be used. So it all depends. You can't win back maybe a round where you've been outstricken, but if not much is happening, you can still close strong. But I think Musayev is one of the smartest fighters out there.
I agree. I think we see that in his footwork as well. He's very, very good at keeping people away from him with his strikes. But even if they're pressuring through his strikes, his footwork is very good at keeping him off the fence. So he's not dealing with being stuck in a clinch position or defending takedowns for too long. And as soon as he's off the fence, he's got the advantage of moving into the center of the smart cage and starting to dominate again. And that's where his striking skills from both sides come into play. A very, very dangerous fighter with his spinning attacks, but also with his close range techniques, his uppercuts and his hooks. I agree with you, right? And that's where a 5-round fight can really determine who's ready to be a champion or not, because it's going to squeeze those extra decision-making moments out of these guys. And the times when Musayev might put his foot on the gas and Duke can change direction might save him a round of getting caught by something nasty and losing on the scorecards. It's, wisdom and fight IQ plays into it so much more over a 5-round fight. And with these guys having a lot of similar skills in their game as well, I feel like, the more they can apply their intelligence, the more likely they're going to come out with the victory.
Can we talk a little bit about Impa Kasanganay? And his name's too hard to pronounce. I'm going to try it. Duvlay Yagshimuradov. I call him D-Yags. But I've really been impressed with what Kasanganay has done in PFL. Really, middleweight, fighting at light heavyweight, having success. The cardio on this guy is amazing. The mental game, so much that he's overcome in his life. It seems like this is just a day out at the park for him.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, this is going to feel very familiar to him, of course. Not only has he fought for this championship before, but he's also, he's done the trip to Riyadh and he's, fought Johnny Eblen out there at middleweight. Kasanganay is a very, very interesting case study, I think. You look at his career up to this point and he's had the ups and downs and the moving through weight classes and stuff, and he's just, every time I speak to him, I feel like I want to talk to him more. I feel like he's a very deep individual. There's a lot going on in his mind. You can tell that he's very, very well considered in everything that he does. And, you put on top of that his ability to fight hard for 25 minutes and only breathe through his nose because his conditioning is so good. Like, I'm excited to see him in this fight against another different opponent. Like, Dovlet is, he's one of those guys. He's a bit of a pick and mix, right? He's got great kicking games. He's got really good short range boxing as well, particularly his uppercut. And of course, he can wrestle, right? So if you're Impa Kasanganay, you've got to try and figure out which one of these skill sets he's going to put forward and how you're going to deal with that first before you get into your game. Now, the thing that makes it easier for Kasanganay is that he knows where he wins these fights, right? He stands at close range. He stands with his feet quite square so he can punch with heavy hands off both sides. He steps through with his punches as well, which allows him to travel with square hips, making takedown defense easier. So there are lots of ways that Kasanganay can put pressure on Dovlet and force him to fight on the inside and defend his takedowns. But there's an inherent risk with every single one of those things, right? If you're moving from too far out, you're moving into his kicking range. As soon as you're inside, you've got to hold range without getting clinched and taken down, and then you're into boxing range. And Dovlet's just as competitive there as anybody else in this division. So, another interesting and tough test for Kasanganay. The one thing that makes life easier for him is that he doesn't have to worry about getting tired over 25 minutes.
I know. That's, like you said, it has a third lung. And going back to the heavyweights, does the winner, in your eyes, get a shot at Francis Ngannou? And Francis fought, high competition, in my opinion, in Renan Ferreira. But then we all said, okay, now what, right? Because we don't want him. I mean, I don't know. If he wants to go back to boxing and grab some big bags, who am I to stop him? But I love watching him compete in mixed martial arts. But the question's always been, who's next? Should the winner of this fight be next?
I think it makes the most sense to me. You've got two guys here, two impressive Russian fighters that are both at different ends of their career. Goltsov has tried this path several times. He's not been successful, but you can't deny that he's got the skills to beat everybody in the division. It's just a case of him doing it successively on the way to $1 million. Probably got the best jab in the heavyweight division right now, and I feel like that could be a real problem for Popov in this fight. But I also expect Popov to be, durable physically and mentally. Fedor in his corner, he's going to be telling him to get his head off the center line and come over the top and around the sides and keep working his wrestling game. And Popov is on the longest win streak in the heavyweight division right now. 18 fights, 19 fights. Like, if he's able to come through this and beat Goltsov, that's a clear contender in my opinion, because of the impressive streak that he's on, as well as the fact that he would have just won the world championship for this year. I mean, it's the one that makes the most sense to me. I think there are other options out there, but I agree with you. Whatever Ngannou does, I would rather him do it in mixed martial arts, because I think we see the best of him. Right? He's more free and just way more dangerous in mixed martial arts.
I know, and I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but it's kind of fun to watch a big guy like him wrestle too, on top of having those hammers. In boxing, you know, all credit to what he did versus Fury, but man, I didn't like seeing what I saw against Anthony Joshua. But you know, again, he did scoop up some big bags. Let's not leave out this last one here. Brent Primus, at 39 years of age, Dan Hardy, can you believe that? Still going. He's going to be fighting in the 155 finals against Gadzi Rabadanov. 39 years of age is kind of like almost 45 for like a heavyweight. It's up there, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, you know, that especially in the lighter divisions, it's very unusual to see a fighter in their late 30s being competitive at this level. You know, normally guys that are getting into their 30s in this sport at the elite level are heavyweights, right? Where the margin for error is so much narrower. You need that wisdom and experience. But what I will say about Brent Primus's style is that it's so dominant that it doesn't really matter what weight he is, because the longer what age he is, because the longer he spends doing it, the more efficient he is at it, right? Like the thing that fades over time when we get older is our ability to perform at a high level, both based on conditioning and based on reaction times. It's not based on strength, right? Brent Primus is an incredibly strong individual, and most of his game is built around strength and wrestling control, right? I feel like he's going to be able to do that well into his 40s if he chooses to, and potentially at this top level as well, given the fact that he's walked that path for so many times. You know, he's massive for the weight class. He's very lean. He's able to ragdoll people and get to their back. And even if he can't submit them, like with the Clay Collard fight, even if he can't wear them down enough to get the submission, he can hold them there for long enough to beat them up and get the decision, right? And one other thing that we have to consider here is that Brent Primus can use elbows in this fight. Like getting stuck in that body triangle in bottom position with elbows, that's not something that you can survive for 25 minutes. So, you know, the age is literally just a number for Brent Primus going into this fight. I think he's got all of the skills that he needs to beat Rabadanov. My question's more around Rabadanov and what we see in his game moving forward, because I feel like his potential is tremendous. I mean, that knockout that he got of Mikhail Dufort was a thing of beauty. You know, forced him to make the mistake and made him pay for it.
Yeah. Folks, it all goes down Friday the 29th. So we're coming up here on a little bit more than a week. And they're going to be out in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So there's going to be an early start time, 9:30 Eastern, for what looks to be about 12, 14 fights. It's a lot of them. I'm glad they threw Jesus Pinedo against Jeremy Kennedy in there as well. I'm really happy to see that. 6 title fights. So it's going to be a long day, but it's going to be a fun day. Some football, some MMA. The multiple TV setup is the way to go. ESPN Plus has you covered. This is Dan Hardy from the broadcast team, and former UFC welterweight title challenger at one time as well. We'll never forget the armbar. He wouldn't quit. One of the toughest mofos out there. Dan, thanks for the time as always. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Always a pleasure talking to you both.